Leeds, Leeds, Leeds. What is happening? Welcome to Working Hours, a show about a place called Leeds, a time called now, and an activity called work. I want to speak to 1,000 learners over the course of what I vaingloriously believe is the most important decade in the history of the human species, and I want to ask those learners about what they do all day and hear how they feel about it all. My name is Simon, and this is all my fault.
What was it that you wanted to be when you grew up?
So at first, I wanted to be an architect because I was really interested in how buildings looked and how they were laid out. But I realised that I couldn't draw, so I looked at other things and realised I quite enjoyed writing and watching the news as a kid. So I was looking into journalism, and eventually, I'd go on to study journalism at uni. Didn't get the result I wanted, but thought, the degree would be handy for other jobs. And of course, doing what I do now, I think what I learned from the degree and attempts at doing freelance work has, come in really handy.
So did the journalism degree help then in the end?
It did. It taught me about things like the 6 W's, who, what, where, when, why, and how, which is technically only 5 W's, but there's a W in it. I learned about, things like shorthand and keeping things clear, where to put facts in. And, that's, helped to shape, how I write things like blog posts, press releases and so on.
Yeah.
Also things about design and even little bits about photography.
Yeah. And layout and yeah.
You're listening to Series 3, Episode 6, and my guest, Luke Aylward. This is another Zoom interview recorded on the 19th of January 2022. Evening, comrades. Luke Aylward is the Communications and Network Officer and Autism Information Officer for the Advonet Group, a Leeds-based advocacy charity. He has worked with them for over 5.5 years. He is autistic and has, like many others, spent the majority of the pandemic working from home. You can find out more about Advonet at advonet.org.uk.
So what is it that you're doing now then?
So I am a communications officer. I'm communications and network officer for a charity in Leeds called the Advonet Group.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the only role I have with that organisation. I'm also the information officer for their Leeds Autism AIM service.
Mm-hmm.
And for a little bit of the week, I'm also information officer for their new Yorkshire Autism AIM project, which is similar, but does a few different things.
Okay. So that's a lot of roles, and is that all fitted into the space of 1 week or different times of the month? Yeah, so all in 1 week. So how did you get into that? Which role did you take on first?
The first role was actually the information officer role for the Leeds Autism AIM service.
Mm-hmm.
So how I got into that was, at the time, which was late 2014, I was working as a senior content writer for a digital marketing agency in Leeds. I was interested in volunteering because, I wasn't feeling too fulfilled in my role. I was thinking about quitting every other day.
Yeah.
Or maybe volunteering would help, make my life a bit better and, being able to help others, less fortunate than myself. I heard about this new service that was going to be set up here for autistic adults. Being autistic myself, I thought, that sounds interesting. And I heard about what it was planning on doing, which was, running a weekly drop-in hub where autistic adults could come in and get, support with things like advocacy, get information and get signposted to useful services, and, maybe get peer support or even even get a mentor, to help them to overcome any obstacles and achieve life goals.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, I'd volunteer, I'd go down to a 4-day working week so I could fit in the volunteering. So, just as AIM was starting to get noticed, sort of around the autumn of 2015, I decided to quit my job with the digital marketing agency because I wasn't, like I said before, I was unhappy and fancied giving freelance content work a go. In freelancing, I had more time to focus on the volunteering side. At the time, I'd also become vice chair of a charity called Leeds-based Adults, which is led by autistic adults.
Yeah.
When I was freelancing, I didn't get as much freelance work in, but I got enough in to cover the bills. And was also given, a bit of, some sessional work with to do things like newsletters and posters and what have you, and run their Facebook page.
Yeah.
And even set up a Twitter account. And I think that's what led to me being offered a part-time role with AIM, which I gladly accepted because it was regular income.
Yeah.
So, so I was doing sessional work for AIM, they really liked it. And when a vacancy came up, because a bit more funding was in place for the service, they offered me the role of information officer, which was initially for 8 hours a week. And because freelance, because it was regular income and it was a chance to do what I liked for a living, doing something good, I accepted it.
Yeah.
From about snowballed into 15 hours when one of my colleagues left for another role, which meant I was able to do more things like help run groups and our drop-in hub, and create more resources. I thought, I'm happy with it. I was just hoping that I'd get enough freelance work on top of that, away from that role to pay the bills.
So when you were doing the freelancing, like, how did you do that? Did you have to set yourself up as a sole trader or become a company or something, or how did you organize it?
So what I did was set up a separate business account, set up a business bank account, but I ended up not really using it in the end. So I just, worked out, from my bank statements what I've got paid, and, kept account of that. It wasn't that much I was getting, but, because I'd saved quite a bit, I was able to, time myself over it.
Yeah.
And some of the work I got was quite regular. I did some work for for an agency in Harrogate, just writing sort of SEO content. So it's contents that are, basically just, have links to brands' websites in, using keywords, key phrases. So, I did all I could to make them, read authentically, and, they worked, because I had quite a bit of experience doing that sort of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you just taken the skills that you've already got from the previous roles and just applying that to something different. So how did the other roles come about then?
So the communications and network officer role, that was advertised internally in early 2018. This was after, the Advonet Group, the charity I work for, was, awarded a new 5-year contract to deliver certain advocacy services in Leeds. And part of a new contract, they offered 25 hours a week for a communications officer. And, I was encouraged by some colleagues to apply because, freelance work wasn't coming in as regularly as I'd liked it to. I thought, why not go for it? And so I did in March of that year, I interviewed for it and I got the job. And from April 2018 to the present day, I've been in that role, and I think I've done all right. I've done what I can to get the Advonet Group's name out there. I think it has worked. We've steadily grown on Twitter and Facebook followings. And, we've been in the press a few times. People know more about what it is we actually do. It's a sign that I'm doing okay.
How much are you doing the same stuff now as you were before in the job that you didn't like? Is it just that you now feel those skills are more meaningfully applied, or are you getting to do different things? Are you sort of, do you have more autonomy in the role now that you're working in these businesses rather than the previous business?
I'd certainly say I have more autonomy because I'm the only person that does communications work. That's the main part of their role. And I'm also able to do more things than just write content. I'm looking after the website. I'm looking after all the social media accounts, producing some internal communications stuff. So, things like wiki in Microsoft Teams. It's got, all sorts of information about, COVID restrictions and support that's available for people in vulnerable groups and marginalized communities. I'm using tools I've never thought I'd use before, like Eventbrite and MailChimp, and I've gained, even, in the past couple of years, I've been editing videos and as well, even, delivering internal training for, how things like how to use Twitter and more recently, how to use WordPress and MailChimp, to give more people skills, in case, I ever leave my job or if I'm off sick,
Yeah. Sounds like you kind of learning and adding new skills with this roles because you need to sort of go into new avenues and cover new areas. So are you getting more skills through doing this then than you were previously?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I'd have ever learned to use MailChimp or any other sort of automated email software, if I was still a content writer. Of course, the company I used to work for, they're no longer in business because they were taken over by a bigger company, and it became the Leeds branch of that company. And I think they closed it down. Was either last year or the year before. I think it was the year before, but very sad.
What are the things that you enjoy about the role that you're doing now?
I think creating resources and, putting out information that people will find useful. So, one example of that is updating our website. We recently, redesigned it, working with an agency based in Bradford who've done a really good job with it and making sure it's more accessible, it's easier to make a referral to our service, having things like news and social media more visible, making sure all the content on each page, pages for each service reads well. It's, that's been quite good. And I've also, created some self-advocacy resources, documents that people can use to help them speak up for themselves. They've been downloaded more than 5,000 times since we put them on the website, the old website, in the middle of last year. No, actually, it was the middle of the year before, but some, stuff like that's really, that's really fulfilling, and I suppose helping some of my colleagues to, build skills themselves, whether it's, if we're using tools or, learning how to use technology like Teams and Zoom. I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of my colleagues were struggling with, working from home and knowing how to do certain things in Teams. But I'd actually had a play around with it a couple of months before then, and that proved to be really useful. So, I'd show up, whenever people had a question, I'd answer it and say, this is how you can start a chat. This is how you can make a file shareable. This is where the wiki is, helping people to help themselves.
Yeah. Which is, kind of your role all over, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
I think that's probably a good segue to go into COVID and lockdown. Take us through going into lockdown and sort of how that changed work for you and what it meant for you for your actual work day to day. So how has that been? Are you sort of back to normal, or has work been permanently changed?
I would say work has changed because I don't see nearly as much of my colleagues face to face as I as I did before COVID. Unfortunately, I've worked from home before doing my freelance content work. That helped to set me up when I was asked to work from home. Because I'm clinically extremely vulnerable, I was told by my line manager, to start working from home. And that was a few days before the first lockdown began.
Yeah.
I had like a few days head start on everyone else, in addition to my experience of working from home in previous roles. The main changes, aside from not seeing people face to face, are that I'm able to, have more control over my working environment. Choose whether or not to have the lights on, the curtains up. I don't have to commute, which is a big plus because the commute, before the commute, when I first started, so, when at the time the first lockdown would take maybe an hour each way,
Yeah.
where I lived in Leeds, to our office at the Unity Business Centre at the bottom of Roundhay Road.
Mm.
Since middle of last year, I've actually moved to Bradford, and the commute does take a lot longer.
Yeah.
The last time I went to the office, which was nearly 2 months ago, it took me 3.5 hours there and back.
Yeah. That's a long time.
Yeah. A lot of it's down to how bad public transport is.
Mm.
But also the buses were crowded. And
I mean, how do you find, like, working from home? How do you find that sort of separation? Do you find, I mean, do you have a separate space to work in, or are you just working, living is all in the same space?
well, my sort of home office is is part of it's part of my living room, but it's in a corner, so it's a bit
Mm.
separate from everything
Yeah.
else. And I don't have any problem separating work from home. I know when I'm meant to start. I know when I'm meant to finish.
Yeah. Are you quite good at finishing on time? Do you sort of work your hours, or do you tend to sort of overwork, or?
It depends on how much I've got to do.
Yeah.
It's not too busy. I'll work my normal hours, but sometimes, just because I want to get stuff done, I might work a little over my
Yeah.
hours. Or, if I've got a group I'm running in my autism main role, I will take those hours.
Mm. I mean, how did that sort of initially affect you when you first went into working from home and went into lockdown? Were you doing a lot more work? Was there a lot less work because everything was cancelled, or was it loads of work cancelling everything? Like, how did it go, and has it evened out now, or is it, sort of more or less work now than it was before?
I'd say there was more work. It's part of my role. I've got to make sure that I've got to make sure that useful information about, what services we offer and what the restrictions are is put out there. And quite a few big pieces of work were, started around, not long after, the lockdown began. One of which was to create a toolkit of resources for our Leeds Autism AIM service. And these are like self-advocacy tools, things that people could use to plan routines and, communicate their needs and all sorts of things like that. And, that proved to be really useful, but, I did end up working quite a bit over my hours for that. And there was also setting up the COVID-19 wiki of resources in Teams. That took up quite a bit of my time as well, but I wanted to make sure it was ready so that, some of the people we work with, as well as, our clients as well, and members as well as, my colleagues had all the information to hand. And, if people were confused about what they could and couldn't do under lockdown,
Yeah.
what was available, they'd be able to get it right away.
Yeah. And I suppose, initially, because the information's always changing all the time, but, it's writing and rewriting advice. So that probably would have been a lot of work initially.
Oh, yeah. It has evened itself out a bit. But I think there's going to be another lot of information coming out because if you've seen the news today, which is Wednesday, the 19th of January, in case you're listening in the future, all Plan B restrictions are going to end soon. So, including mask wearing. So that's something I'm going to be trying to put out to colleagues and to our clients.
Should we go a little bit into autism then, and sort of like how it affects you, how it affects your role, how it plays into what you're doing, and how it would affect other people, and what you're doing to kind of help alleviate any of those detrimental effects?
Well, being autistic, I'm not so great with people, and I do experience things like sensory overload and information overload. So if I can feel a bit, stressed or anxious if I get a lot of emails from colleagues, in the space of like 10, 15 minutes.
Yeah.
So, it can be hard to know which one to prioritize. If someone's not communicating clearly with me, asking, what they'd like from me, that can be hard to decipher. What else? I mean, there are times, when, I want to be left alone to do left to my own devices to, just get on with the job. And when I'm getting, a message on Teams or an email or something like that, that can be quite distracting. But, it's not all bad, being autistic, I know how to be, clear and honest with people, like be handy in communications work. The way I think, many of us autistic people, we think, differently to non-autistic folk. And that can be in some situations, that can be quite advantageous. I have an ability to think creatively and, for example, when I'm, working on thinking of, new resources we can use to help clients. So, I think back to the start of the pandemic, the weekly planner I did for AIM, that was the daily planner as well. Those were ideas I had, and they've proved to be, very popular. I like to think of myself as fairly organized. So when I'm at work anyway, and that's helped me to, do things like set out, what sort of tasks I need to do every week, do a weekly checklist, every Sunday of things I'm meant to do. I've been very good at sort of keeping up with my hours, making sure I'm working them, and also doing things like monthly timetables for the AIM services online Zoom groups. As far as that stuff's concerned, being autistic has been really useful.
Let's talk first about how it's affected your work in terms of, did you have a diagnosis of being autistic before you started work or while you were in work? Right. So before you started work.
Yeah, I was diagnosed at a young age, and being autistic, at the time, throughout my childhood, a lot of people, educate, people from schools and, assumed that, I wasn't going to amount to much. I wasn't going to be able to, independently hold down a job or, own a house. It's worth mentioning that not many autistic people are able to find work, able to get into work for numerous reasons. One of them being, discrimination. A study that the National Autistic Society published a few years ago found that only 1 in 6 autistic adults of working age was in a full-time paid job.
1 in 6 is incredibly low.
I know it's shocking. And in the AIM service, we have a lot of people come to us who are struggling to get into work, and even those who are in work, many of those in work will come to us. They're wanting to, they're needing support to help communicate their needs when trying to make their jobs more accessible and it's easier for them to work. If you're in work, trying to get reasonable adjustments isn't the easiest thing in the world. Whether it's trying to get funding for access to work, to fund things like online tools and ergonomic equipment, noise cancelling headphones. In my old job with the digital agency, I asked if I could maybe work 1 day a week from home, because I found working in an open plan office space really overloading. The phones would go off constantly, and quite a few of my colleagues were probably still are quite loud. When a load of people talking at once and phones are going off, people walking behind me constantly. I just really struggled to cope with that. So, I asked if I could work a day a week at home. That was politely turned down, and there weren't many quiet spaces to work in the office. So, I've had some experience of that myself.
In terms of discrimination against people with disabilities in workplaces and people with autism and people with any sort of conditions where they're, reasonable adjustments have to be made. I mean, do you think that's the major thing that puts off businesses, is that they feel that they have to spend extra on the employee of, making reasonable adjustments? Or
I think that's one of the reasons, but others, include sort of misconceptions of what being autistic actually is, and what autistic people can do. Other reasons, let's think. I mean, there are some things that autistic people struggle with, like maintaining eye contact and, in some cases, verbal communication and other forms of communication. But that's when, some employers see that, they automatically assume that means they're incapable of doing jobs. But that's not true. They just need to make adjustments to ensure that, if, the autistic person who wants to work for them has applied for that job, applied for any of their vacancies, is able to do that job, make those adjustments. Ask the person, what adjustments they'd like, if possible, help out with, getting access to work funding, or, maybe setting up a quiet space. At the Advonet Group, in our office, we recently refurbished it, and there is actually a quiet room where, where there's dimmable lighting and blinds, shut. So, it doesn't let any natural light in that, autistic staff can work in. In fact, that's the area of the office I've been working in, since, I started going back into the office last summer.
I suppose it's a challenge because you kind of want to be back in the office to a degree to sort of interact with colleagues and catch up with them properly and have the actual, sort of collegiate relationships. But then, you've got the commute and you've got the going into the office, and are they looking for a hybrid sort of thing, or is it just going to be you going occasionally?
I don't think we've decided yet. I mean, this week we've actually been talking about, when it's safe to go into the office. Something's going to be emailed to all staff next week, I believe. It's actually interesting you brought that question up because the chief executive, Philip, he rang me this afternoon asking, how comfortable I was with going into the office. I said, infection rates go down, and it might be that I feel more comfortable in going, but I'm going to give it maybe till the end of the next month, see what's what, and if it's safe, I'll go in once a week.
Yeah, I mean, have you been going in for sort of events? Are you running any face-to-face event? I'll say that again. Are you running any face-to-face events at the moment?
I mean, we kind of paused some of the face-to-face stuff in some of the other areas we work in, recently due to Omicron. But some of them are resuming. I think part of the reason for face-to-face activities being start is that some of the staff have caught COVID, from no fault of their own. And it's difficult to do that if you've got COVID.
Yeah.
I haven't done any face-to-face work personally since the start of the pandemic. That's because a lot of my work can be done remotely. In fact, all my work can.
And you're at larger risk.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And, it's riskier for me to go into the office than it is for most of my colleagues.
So we'll stay on the sort of, 2020s hot political topic questions. So has Brexit affected your work at all, or have you not been able to tell what with COVID sort of happening at the same time?
It hasn't affected my role too much, but it has affected some of the people we work with. Quite a few of our clients who access our community advocacy service, which is single issue subjects like accessing services, benefits, housing, making complaints. Some of them are don't speak English as the first language. They're from countries like Czech Republic, Slovakia, Romania, Spain, and Italy. Many countries that are part of the EU 27. And with Brexit, on the horizon, with rules changing, the transition period, ending. They may have been wondering, what can they do, in terms of accessing services, gaining citizenship, and but issues like that have come up, I believe, for some of our clients, and also the issue of their rights, their rights to live and work in the country and make a life here.
Yeah,
they changed, and
I mean, as well with the service. I mean, I suppose that's more of you updating lots of information, but also, with the people that you're updating the information for, you need to, what am I trying to say here? But like you don't, obviously it's a situation where things are changing a lot, which can be like a sensory overload of like, I don't know what to think, what's happening minute to minute. I mean, that's going to be a difficult thing to kind of communicate out to to an autistic audience of who want the information but don't want to be overwhelmed. Have I said that in an okay way? Like, does that make sense?
I think so. Yeah. So, in terms of like, presenting information, so making sure it's in an accessible format helps. So on the Advonet Group website, we've got a translation tool that translates into, a number of community languages, including some of those I've mentioned, Czech, Slovak, Romanian, French, Italian, and Hungarian. Other languages can be added pretty quickly. I mean, there are other ways of making information accessible depending on the audience. So, so for clients with learning disabilities, we try and use short sentences and where we can easy read images. This is something that a lot of other services in Leeds are doing, especially those whose primary client base is adults with learning disabilities. For autistic people, we try to use clear, concise language. And, there are some principles for, all audiences are trying to follow. So, for example, on a website, if I'm writing a blog post, I'd make sure not to use more than 4 lines per paragraph and no more than 20 words per sentence. Try to avoid using jargon where possible, and any imagery that helps, like easy read images or icons, they can come in handy for some of the resources I've made.
Okay, so let's go on to climate change. So in terms of climate change, what can you do in your work, and what is your work already doing to sort of tackle it or reduce your impact or to do something else?
So in my role, don't print as much. Obviously since COVID began, I've not had to print anything like as much as I would normally do. Because, we're doing most of our stuff online, it's just, creating PDF online versions instead. I know that uses electricity, but it doesn't use paper and ink as well. So, that's one thing we're doing. I suppose in work, because most people are working from home, they're not using, the lights or, any other sort of electrical outlets to charge the laptops up as much. I think other things we've looked at doing include, maybe encouraging car shares and, maybe, I don't think there's much else we've done, but, it's something, something that we're looking at. And I think quite a few of my colleagues are keen for us to do more and, reduce printing, recycle more, which we do. We do have a green bin in the office. For all recyclables, so paper, card, empty cans of pop.
I mean, is it mainly internal things, or does it go into the sort of, does it come into the communications as well when you're communicating out? Do you do any press releases or anything around that area, or?
I haven't done any press releases around climate change yet. But, no, but a lot of my colleagues, me and a lot of my colleagues, we're doing, we're trying to sort of use this only print when necessary.
Yeah.
Maybe look at changing to a greener printer. But uses less ink.
So I'll move to the next question, which is the one on UBI. I should do what would you change first, but I'll do the UBI first and then we'll come to the what would you change. So if you had a universal basic income, first of all, would you still work? Secondly, would you still work in this job? And then thirdly, if you wouldn't be working, what would you be doing?
I would still work if I got the UBI. I mean, it depends how much the UBI is for. If it's like able to like completely cover the cost of my cost of living.
Yeah.
Which I'm guessing it wouldn't. But
It depends how much they set it at. But I would want it to be like, a good sort of decent wage. I mean, to be honest, I'd want it around the UK average, because if that's the average, then that's what it should be paid.
I probably still would work because, I want to keep busy, want
Yeah.
to do. And I suppose working in the third sector, I'm doing something that's actually useful, helping some of my colleagues to do useful work, like passing information on to their clients, and, running online groups to help reduce isolation.
I mean, would it free up sort of more capacity for you as well? Do you think you would do you think you'd end up working more, or do you think you'd end up working less hours? Would you because the roles you're doing, they're all things that you want to do, that you're interested in doing. Would you try and balance out the amount of time that you give to each a bit more, maybe, or do you think that'd change?
I think I'd probably maybe go down to 4 days a week. So that,
Yeah.
instead of working, Monday to Friday, but Monday to Tuesday, and then Thursday to Friday, and have Wednesday off. Wednesday could be like a well-being day, or maybe a day used for volunteering, doing something in a local community.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, have you had any previous opportunity to kind of experiment with your work day and your work times, like sort of what your optimal working is and how many days off? And have you had much chance with that?
Well, not in the current role, but like I said earlier, in my old role
With the freelance stuff?
Well, before then, as a
All
copywriter for a digital agency, went down to 4 days a week and was able to volunteer, which has led me to where I am now. So,
go on, sorry.
Was the fact that I was able to go down 4 days a week to fit in the volunteering was really useful. And, I would look at doing something similar with that, if I was only working 4 days a week and got UBI.
But do you think you'd end up volunteering on something else then, and then taking something else on?
Yeah, probably. One idea I've had is to set up a social group for autistic adults in the Bradford area. Because there's nothing like that that's available for free. There is a service called Specialist Autism Services that work, in the district to, do run groups, but in order to access them, you'd have to, get funding through your GP. A lot of autistic adults wouldn't want to go through that because it's, there's a lot of admin involved and a lot of waiting, and, for many people, a possibility that they might not get that funding, and plus, that service might not be to their liking. So, if I had the time, I'd look at setting something like that up.
Yeah. Cool. Right. So I'll do the change questions, then we'll do social media. So if you could change any 3 things about your work, and this can be any or all of your roles, what 3 things would you change?
I think the first thing is to do less internal communications, because I'm always worried about getting it wrong. Some of my colleagues won't understand, what I've said, what I mean?
Yeah.
Plus, I really don't like emailing people about, what's going on, all the time.
Yeah,
So
you get all the questions back because you're now the expert on it.
Yeah.
It's like, I only know this. I've just told you what I know.
I don't know what else I'd change. Maybe fewer meetings, because one of the teams I'm in, we have meetings every week, whereas the other team I'm in, it's only like once a month, and once a week, it's nice to see my colleagues, albeit online, but I think one meeting a week that's often running for over an hour, is a bit much. And time that I might want to use for other things, like, updating the website, or, creating a new resource, or, something else like maybe, preparing for a group.
Yeah. I mean, is it the kind of role where you have to squeeze everything into the hours that you've got, or are there enough hours in the day to do everything?
It varies from week to week, but there are some weeks where it does feel like I have to squeeze everything in.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's comms work as well, isn't it? Because you've always got some deadline for press release or something. So social media wise, I mean, obviously you have to do a fair bit of social media work. I mean, more and more it's becoming more part of people's roles. So yeah, do you have to do all your own social media work? Are you doing everything social media for the roles that you're doing, or are other people helping? How does it work?
So I'm like the main person for some of the Advonet Group social media accounts. So the main one for the whole service, the Leeds Autism main one, the Yorkshire Autism main one, and one for another part of our service called Change, which produces easy read, accessible information, and does other things like trade around the rights of disabled people, some project work. I run those accounts for those services. But other parts of the service, like Leap One, which is a people first group for adults with learning disabilities, and Asking You, which is another sort of learning disability focused service, they're run by people in those teams. But yeah, most of the social media work is done by myself within work hours. But now and again, I'll check in, see if we've been tagged in a tweet or read a DM, read a DM in Twitter or a message in our Facebook inbox. Or I also like to check, things like I also like to check analytics from time to time, to see how things are performing.
Well, you need that feedback, don't you, to see what's working, and it's kind of all you've got, really. So what I'll go into from there is if we talk about basically what's coming up, and if you can go through sort of how do people get in touch? How do people find out about Advonet? How do people find out about all the companies?
Advonet Group.
Yeah, Advonet Group.
What's coming up then? Outspoken project, which is for LGBTQ plus high plus autistic adults in Leeds. These are self-advocacy workshops. They start on Wednesday, the 22nd of February, from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. To join, you must be an autistic adult who's in Leeds, who's also LGBTQI plus. And it's delivered by people from that community. Other than that, we have like usual sort of groups that are held every month. So in our Leeds Autism main team, we have 2 peer support groups every month. I'm leading on those at the moment. We have a monthly Women Aligned group, which is for autistic women and femme-aligned non-binary people. That's led by one of my colleagues who's also autistic. There's also a co-production group that's run every month by myself. It's where we look at resources we've made or a part of Leeds Autism Aim's work, and we ask people in the group who are autistic for suggestions on how it can be made better. These are really useful for getting feedback and making changes, because I think if it's more input we have from the people we work with, the better. I think that's it at the moment. That's coming up immediately.
So how do people get in touch then? If you can give us the website links, what are the socials? Is there a newsletter?
Yeah.
Or any newsletters?
Websites. It's advonet.org.uk. So that's advonet.org.uk. That's the website. If you email us, you can email us at office@advonet.org.uk, or if you prefer, call our office on 0113 244 0606. Our Twitter handle is @AdvonetUK. You can find, search for the Advonet Group on Facebook and you'll find us there. We're also the Advonet Group on LinkedIn.
Excellent. Brilliant. Thank you very much. So what I will do, are you okay to keep going?
Sure.
Okay, cool. So I want to kind of do a bit more sort of bring out more of what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. So the kind of things that you do and the kind of, I mean, what is your day-to-day like, basically? I would imagine it changes from day to day, or maybe you've got a program of like Mondays is videos, Tuesdays is whatever. Like, what's your sort of day-to-day process?
It depends on what hours I'm working, what projects I'm working on that day. But tasks I will do every day is check our socials first thing in the morning to see if we've had any, if we've been retweeted, or if there's something we've been tagged in, or if there's something worth tweeting, or posting on any of our socials. I would also share something about what we're doing, so it could be about any upcoming training we're offering, about how to make a referral, or a link to any page of our website that might be useful. So one day it could be about our more of our advocacy services. Another day could be about joining our mailing list. Other things I would do is log into the website and check how many people viewed it in the previous 24 hours. If there's any sort of updates need making to it. Some days I would also look for information to put into our COVID-19 wiki, through websites of the government's COVID website, anything from the council, or some of the third sector networks like Forum Central or Voluntary Action Leeds. If there's anything there that might be useful. When I'm on my AIM hours, I would, I do the same with the AIM socials as I would with the Advonet Group socials, and deal with the website. Otherwise, I go along with, what work I believe needs to be done. There are some days where I can just focus on one task, like editing a video, but there are often days where, I get, a few last minute requests from, service managers, or, the chief executive, or my line manager, who's part of the senior management team, to work on a resource, or,
do you like to have your day quite structured, or do you like it to be quite free? Do you like to sort of have variety, or do you want it to be regular?
I would like at least some structure. I'd like to know what I'm meant to be doing. I'd like to know what I'm doing, in advance. But
yeah,
I do set aside some time for sort of any sort of ad hoc stuff that needs doing. But if I've got anything that needs to be done, like, delivering training to colleagues, or working on a new leaflet, or amending bits on the website, I try my best to plan that in advance. So, somewhere in between.
Yeah. When you're working on copy, is that all sort of self-generated, or are you working in line with sort of other people, or you're getting a steer from one person, or how are you working that?
It depends on what I'm working on, but if it's a specific service, like health complaints advocacy, I would, ask the health complaints advocacy manager or someone else in that team, what they'd like me to do, and for guidance, and I'd produce something, send it back to them by email for feedback, and if they've got any changes they can make them, or suggest that I make them, and I'll make those. Send it back to them. They're all right. It gets published.
Yeah. Cool. What else do I want to kind of cover? So in terms of interactions with people sort of through the work, are you mainly interacting just with colleagues and with people within the organization? I suppose you get some contacts on socials and the website and stuff from some incoming stuff, but do you get to interact with service users?
I do interact with service users sometimes. It's more so in my AIM role, when I'm running groups, or responding to queries about how to join groups, or around things like self-advocacy resources. In the comms role, I only tend to interact with clients if we've got a focus group meeting coming up. Sometimes I'm in that, wearing my comms hat, say if it's a resource that, we're looking for feedback on, like, the website, or a service leaflet, or a poster. Then, I can make those notes, and based on those notes, I can make those changes. a lot of all the time it's good to get feedback, good or bad, where you're going right and where, things can be made better and more accessible.
Yeah. Well, otherwise you've just no idea, and you don't know if anyone even cares, do you? It's like, if no one tells you anything, it's like, well, no one would miss me if I wasn't doing it. Even sometimes just someone telling you where you're going wrong. It's like, well, at least someone's paying attention. I would also like to get you to talk about, because last time we spoke, I was listening back, and so tell me if I've got this wrong, but initially you had a diagnosis of Asperger's before they diagnosed you as autistic.
Well, so my diagnosis is still Asperger's. It's not
right.
At the time, if you were seen as high functioning, which is quite an offensive label, because there are always times when you're functioning and when you're not functioning. When I was a kid, it was Asperger's, but the diagnostic criteria for autism changed. So people would have been diagnosed with Asperger's, would now just get an autism diagnosis.
So is it, it's all come into one sort of umbrella?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. So is that more that they've just said that this is on a spectrum rather than, what have they changed there? Did they have a discrete, separate kind of, this is Asperger's and this is autism?
Not completely separate, but there were some differences. So if you had an Asperger's diagnosis, you were seen as maybe having fewer problems in trying to lead a normal life. But it's due down to something called the Diagnostic Services Manual. But decided to do away with the Asperger's, to get rid of the Asperger's, eventually get rid of the Asperger's label. And to some, the Asperger's label is quite offensive because it's connected to someone called Hans Asperger, who, 2 or 3 years ago was found, actually, I think it was a bit longer than that. It's found to be have some sort of role in how big the Nazis. I don't use the label Asperger's, or the colloquial version, Asperger. I just say I'm autistic. It's simpler, and if I'd been diagnosed today, it would be autism.
Yeah, and it seems even with, from what I understand, which is not much, it was. So I saw a thing where there was a woman in the UK that they picked, who had done a lot of work basically around her son, and it got more autistic people together and said, this diagnosis of autism, it's wrong. This is not how autistic people are. So it seems like, obviously correct me if I'm wrong on any of this. It seems like really they're only understanding what autism really is in the last couple of decades. Is that fair, or have I got that completely wrong?
Didn't know about that story, to be honest. I probably should do, but give them who I work for, but don't really know, to be honest. Being autistic affects people in different ways. Some of us find that we're perfectly fine with communicating in the way, others non-verbal, because for a variety of reasons. Some are okay in masking, which is where you're pretending to be, you're trying to hide the fact that you're autistic, and others find masking incredibly difficult. I personally struggle with masking. I feel like I have to mask quite a lot. That's one of the main drawbacks of working in the role I'm in.
Yeah.
But sorry, I'm lost where I am.
No, that's fine.
Yeah.
So yeah, I basically I just want to. I'm trying to get a bit more detail so that we can. Yeah, I'm going to fill in some sort of blanks later. What am I trying to say here now? I'm not sure I've got anything else. Is there anything that you want to talk about in any kind of specific area? Anything that we've not covered?
I suppose I could talk more about my experience as an autistic person, early on.
Mm. I
Uh,
mean, like as well, maybe if you covered your early experiences, and then sort of, it'd be quite nice for you to talk about how you interacted with AIM and how, I mean, if I'm remembering this right, you came into contact with other autistic groups in Leeds through your contact with AIM and AIM being set up. Is that right?
yeah, well, it's actually through the group I was chairing,
Oh, yeah.
Leeds
Yeah.
Advonet. I actually first went to them kind of around 2009. But
So
stopped
did you set that group up?
No, no, I didn't. It was already set up. It was actually founded by the partner of an autistic adult in Otley.
Mm-hmm.
They had autistic children. It was back when I first started going. It was kind of it was like very little autistic input into how it was led, how it was run. They just basically did what what they want, what not the husband, what husband and wife pairing wanted, rather than the regulars who went to the group. But when I got involved with it again, the people had found that it left, and it became a bit more autistic led. And through that, I was able to meet other autistic people. I felt less isolated that way, and
Was that the first time as well? Was that the first time you'd been able to have those interactions
with other autistic people?
Yeah.
No, I'd had interactions in other ways. I'd go to things like go to events like book fairs and days. I'd met people through that, and also met forums in Facebook groups. It wasn't actually until not long after I graduated from uni, when I was really, really, really angry about not being able to get into any kind of paid work, that I twigged that maybe the reason I wasn't getting any kind of any job offers was because I was autistic.
Yeah.
I'd found some forums and found out that other people had the same problem, and over time, I'd make friends, digital, sort of online, and meet some of them in person, and some of the friends that people have met that way through like autistic forums and groups. I'm still in contact with them today.
Yeah. So you didn't meet through the groups, but sort of coming back into the groups, like the Asperger's group. It sounds like that was kind of, well, I mean, obviously it was key because of your involvement in that. You then got these other roles, but that seems like it was a key part. I mean, it sounded as well like you were sort of quite instrumental in setting up AIM. Is that fair? Or
to some extent, but there were a group of us involved in setting it up. So
yeah,
Wendy Cork, who's my line manager and currently at the Advonet Group's director of inclusion projects, she actually approached me at an event I went to called Autscape in 2013, and told me about this service would become AIM. I'd meet her again like the following year, an event in Manchester called the Autism Show, which had just like loads of stalls and talks and what have you. She got in touch with me by email and told me about this sort of planning meeting for AIM, and I went to that and thought, I'll get involved with this. It was me. There was another one of my colleagues who's still working with AIM to this day. She started as a paid member of staff at the same time I did. There's someone else was a volunteer who's now working with, I think she's working with Autism East Midlands. And then there's one of my friends, Jonathan, who's still a member of AIM steering group and did, some training, some of the autism awareness training for our volunteer mentors. I actually first met him through Leeds Asperger Adults, and we've been friends for ages. He might be a good person to interview for your podcast.
Oh no,
because
yeah.
he works for the British Library and he's been there for years.
Thank you again to Luke for being my guest. Thanks again to all my guests, and thanks to Leeds for being my subject, and thanks most of all to you for listening. So I have some news. I'm going to start using these outros to reflect on work and to give you some background on the project. I'm still going to be verbose and mercurial on here because that's how I am, but I want this podcast to be and feel professional, in scare quotes. Firstly, in case you haven't noticed, I don't really talk about my guests. That will continue, I think, because I don't know my guests for the most part, and I want them, or you, if you choose to be a guest, to speak for themselves. That's the whole point of this thing in the first place. But I know that what I say on the show could be taken by some as a reflection or comment on my guests. Secondly, I do want to protect my guests as much as I possibly can, and it's actually a serious consideration because I don't want harm to come to anyone unless they hold huge amounts of power, but we're not talking about that here, Simon. But in all seriousness, we do live in a ridiculous time where people's lives can be ruined by the internet, and I don't take that lightly. My guests should feel as free as possible to say whatever they know and feel about their own work experience and be able to be honest and open with me. I know there are limits to that, and some of those I respect and I think are reasonable, while others, like the mass proliferation of NDAs, just shows the weakness of individuals needing income and the disproportionate power of businesses to take over parts of our lives and take our decisions for us. I don't feel safe or comfortable saying whatever I want here, and this is my own show. So what does that tell us about the sort of world we live in? No wonder it's so hard to find guests for the show. So that brings me on to the third point, professionalism. What's professionalism, Precious? Well, I'm getting the sense that being professional is kind of like the opposite of the idea of normal. That is, nobody knows what professional is, but everyone thinks they're it. Swearing is a great example. I don't like workplaces where you can't swear, especially if you are doing something stressful. Obviously not in front of customers, but even there, some would think nothing of doing that. So professional is an elastic term. But I don't want to scare people off from being on the show. I don't want to seem too office professional and give off boss vibes and scare off ordinary people, and I don't want to be too scruffy and uncouth that I put off owners. I want to give my listeners a sense of what's happening day to day in Leeds in 2022. I want listeners to know how much is happening and how varied that is. I want you, my listeners, to know what we are doing at this point in time. Are we doing what is necessary? Are we using our calories and time on the right things? Are we helping? Are we doing harm? Can we even worry about that? Or is reflecting on what we have wrought a path to despair, sloth, and ruin? Sorry. So yes, professional. So working hours is a whole thing, and each episode is only a part of the whole picture. It's conceived to be 1,000 interviews. These intros weren't even supposed to exist. They weren't planned. Originally, I just wanted to drop the listener into a conversation and then give them basically nothing else to work with. I wanted to really play up that eavesdropping feeling of podcasts. I wanted you to feel like you'd just overheard something mildly interesting that you then got drawn into. Forces, my cowardice, I suppose, being first among them, compelled the project in another direction. But it is its own thing, and I need to respect it. Life expectancy continues to fall, standards of living go down, and house prices go up. Such is late-stage capitalism. But the workplace is not for honesty, is it? The workplace, and this is my workplace, is for discipline, toil, innovation, gossip, and a whole load of other things. Other shows are telling you things you already know, and for most of us, that's something we're grateful for. Confirmation bias helps us know how smart we are. It's why we consume the news that we do, the news that we agree or even disagree with. And it's part of the reason why I don't consume the so-called news. But this show is telling me things that I don't know, and I really like that. And I know there are some people who will also like that. And I just have to have the faith that I can find those people, however small in number they are. And I need to resist the temptation to be a mercurial clown because I'm frustrated. I'm still at work, even if my boss is the coolest guy ever. So, to recap, my guests speak for themselves. I want to provide a good experience for guests. It's not appropriate for me to be totally inconsistent with my intros and outros. This is all my fault, but I do have obligations. Conclusion. I will try to operate on the keep it brief side. If you do like listening to my rambles, there will be new, more appropriate, less in this podcast places, for me to do that. If you want to know more about that, then come and join me on the Patreon. Other than that, please come back next week for my guest, Paul Thomas, who is a civil servant, and there will be different, more even-keeled intro and outro to that show, and that should continue going forward. They might just become really basic, but it's all about the interview. That's the show, the interview. It's Leeds, it's you. You're the show. If you're listening to this, I assume you have some connection to Leeds, like living here or being from here. If you're such a person in Leeds or from Leeds, and you haven't done your recording for working hours yet, then don't wait. Email me right now. Right now. Quick, get a pen. workinghourspod@western-studios.com. Let's arrange some time for us to record your working hours interview. If you fancy being my guest, put guest in the subject of your email and add a short bio and some suggestions of your availability. If you want to be on working hours, we will need a 2-hour window in which to record. I can record in your work time or during your downtime. I have been recording interviews over Zoom for over a year, but I can record offline too. You can appear on working hours anonymously, or you can promote yourself and or your company or your brand. Cleaner or owner, what is your experience? How do you feel about work? What do you like and not like? What do you do, Leeds? Be a part of local history, have your voice heard, share your wisdom, give us the inside skinny. This is your show, Leeds. It's all about what you make of yourself. Do you know what you're doing? If you do, then come and tell me about it. Come on, even if you don't. Email me right now. Get that pen, workinghourspod@western-studios.com. If you're allowed to, that is. If you're not allowed to, then tell me why not. If you and your business aren't ashamed of what you do, then let's hear about it. What good are you doing the rest of us? Are you socially useful? Am I? Is this? Email me right now. Get that pen. workinghourspod@western-studios.com. Send me feedback, questions, comments, and queries about working hours. What is happening, Leeds? Follow this show on Twitter @WorkingHours3 and on Instagram @WorkingHoursPodLeeds to find out when episodes are being released, or use the hashtag WorkingHoursPod to find me on either. I'm also on Facebook, but I hate it there. I'm also on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/in/Simon-Treen, or you can go to my company page, which is linkedin.com/company/Western-Studios. If you want to make a podcast in Leeds, whether it's for a cause, a publicity campaign, a product promotion, and or your passion projects, then get in touch with Western Studios for support, advice, and guidance on anything podcasts. At Western Studios, you can work with a real loiner who is actually in Leeds that you can actually work with on making podcast content. So don't wade through articles and videos and podcasts about how to make podcasts. Western Studios can just make your podcast with you or even for you. Western Studios can take on your podcast admin, recording, editing, transcription, whatever. Tell me about it. I really want to hear from other failed screenwriters such as myself to look at making your material as audio content. So if you have an old script hanging around, and again, you are Leeds-based, then get in touch. I'd love to hear from you. Ditto to performers and actors who might be interested in doing voice work. Got an inkling that you'd like a podcast, but you don't know where to start? Then hit me up at makemypodcast@western-studios.com and we'll start making your podcast. The first hour of consultation and pre-production will be free for you, so get in touch and let's have a chat. Save the hassle, save the headache, and make your podcast with a Leeds-based, in-real-life podcast producer, me, at Western Studios Leeds. Once again, please let Working Hours get big and strong by joining its Patreon. Support Working Hours by becoming a champion on Patreon for £1 a month. You can also chat to me about the show, and God, do I need to find someone to talk to about this. Go to patreon.com/workinghourspod right now and sign up. Please remember to like, share, follow, and subscribe to this show. Every little bit helps. Tell your gran, tell your housekeeper, tell your gardener, tell your parole officer, tell your boss, tell Leeds, and I'll see thee next time. Working Hours is presented, edited and recorded by Simon Treen for Western Studios Leeds Limited. The music was The Bees from Chopin's Etudes, which is in the public domain and was taken from musopen.org.